Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to the webinar series, Productive Uses of Energy for Livelihood, Improved Livelihoods in Humanitarian Contexts. And this is the third webinar in the series titled The Energy-Livelihood Ecosystem in Humanitarian Setting, Finance, Technology Supply Chains, Market Linkage, and Stakeholder Roles. This webinar is organized jointly by ICRC, Energypedia, GPA UNITA, and SELCO Foundation. And as you know, this webinar is part of an ongoing webinar series, and we are actually coming to the end with this third and the last webinar in this series. So if you haven't had a chance to look at our earlier webinar, I do encourage you to have a look at them. In our first webinar, we set the scene where we try to understand what is the energy livelihood nexus. And then in our second webinar, we dived deeper into the topic and we said, okay, what are the tools and delivery models that one can use for energy livelihood intervention plannings? And today we'll go even one step further and we'll try to understand the ecosystems. Sorry, I just realized you are not able to see my screen, so I'm just going to quickly share that. Apologies on that. So hopefully you can see my screen, and apologies on that again. So as I said, so today we are in the third webinar where we are now going to dive deeper into finance, technology supply chain, market linkages, and stakeholder roles. So we hope you enjoy the webinar, as today we have a stellar lineup of panels with great presentations and panel discussions. So stay tuned for that. And moving forward, we are taking questions today, so please do send us all your questions. You can use the chat box on the right side of your screen. In case you are using a mobile device or a tablet, then you can, on your app, the GoToWebinar app, there is a question mark. So if you click on that, like a pop-up will appear where you can type in your questions. Please do send us your question throughout the whole presentation time, and towards the panel discussion, then we will pass it to the moderator for asking to the designated speakers. So we welcome all questions, and yeah, please use the chat to send them to us. So let's kickstart by having a quick look at the agenda for today. So today we are going to kickstart with a presentation from SELCO Foundation, where we are going to look at ecosystem aspects for energy livelihood solutions. Then we are going to move into a joint presentation from Practical Action and Energy4Impact, where we are going to then look at what are the impact on support to livelihood and productive users in Rwandan refugee camps. And then we are going to have great panel discussion where we are going to dive further deeper into the topic of how does ecosystem look like for energy livelihood solutions. So without further ado, I would like to welcome our first speaker for today, Rachita Mishra. Rachita is the Associate Director at SELCO Foundation, and she has over a decade of experience in the sector. So Rachita, the floor is yours. If you could kindly switch on your camera and your microphone.
Thank you so much for the introduction, and I hope my screen is visible.
Yes, it is. If you could go full screen mode, perfect.
Yeah. So thank you so much for that, and it's my privilege to be here, part of this discussion in the last and concluding webinar that we have here, discussing primarily how do we build an energy livelihood ecosystem in a humanitarian setting. Before we go on, just to set the context itself, I think we're all aware about the need of energy when we're actually responding to humanitarian settings. But in general, I think when we talk about ecosystem approach itself, some of the questions that I think came to our mind why we wanted to conclude in this manner was, we've heard about the need to look at energy and livelihood interventions in the first panel. We spoke about how do you plan for interventions in the second panel. And I think here we wanted to discuss about how do we ensure that whatever interventions we're designing actually have a sustained impact. Livelihood is something which requires multiple aspects to come together. Technology is a very small piece of it. In the end, how do we use energy and how we use technology, the market that we cater to, the product that we actually develop how do we finance it? How do we manage our business cash flows? And what kind of support do we need to actually incubate these livelihoods? Those questions become extremely important. All of this, of course, needs to be done in the context of humanitarian setting, using financials which are very, very expensive, which are very, very less. So we need to make sure that we utilize it in a manner that it creates the most efficient program and creates the most impactful program as well. So when we keep that in mind as well, I think before we move forward, I wanted to just set a context for our attendees as well, who might be maybe new to this context itself, which is saying that, in humanitarian settings also there are variabilities. There are different types of humanitarian settings, and because of that, the way that we need to engage with the people, we need to engage with livelihood and energy intervention differs, quite a bit. And these are some of the aspects that actually, can be maybe said that these are the aspects that make a context different from one humanitarian setting to the other. So it becomes maybe one of the first things that we need to understand before we start even going into an ecosystem discussion around humanitarian settings. So, for example, when we talk about cause of disaster, which has created a humanitarian, situation, is, it can be a climate risk. It can be just internal migration that is happening because of loss of livelihood in other areas, because of droughts, because of flooding, because of pandemic, which also resulted in huge migration and a different kind of humanitarian setting to emerge. But of course, the other aspect is social conflict as well, which is extremely a political conflict also, and is a very, very different way of intervening and a different kind of emergency that we need to look at also. There are different factors, of course, from the time frame perspective. Is it, an emergency which has been, created today that we really need to respond to? Versus is it something which is post-emergency, or is it a protracted settlement which we need to actually respond to with a livelihood solution? Is it a restricted camp? Is it an unrestricted camp? Is it a restricted market in which the livelihood is operating, or is it unrestricted and can interact with the host communities in a market outside as well? So all of these aspects actually, then kind of look at like how are we actually talking about or thinking about our solutions as well? Are they primarily from a mitigation perspective? Are they looking at developing a kind of local economic activity in the long run? Or are they actually looking at rehabilitation or building safety nets, which actually look at resilience building for the long-term future as well? And all of these actually, then we can actually, after understanding these three aspects, can we actually say, okay, now what is the solution? How do we prioritize the solution that we need to kind of roll out? How do we interact with the local players that are there? And how do we provide those convergences and partnerships? So to take into an example itself, this is the kind of ecosystem mapping that we usually define as SELCO Foundation, which I just wanted to put forth as an example. We say that any ecosystem solution or any solution for it to be driven by an ecosystem approach needs to have 5 components to it. One is, of course, because we're talking about livelihood and energy ecosystem, there is a technology solution which is at the core of it. What is this technology innovation actually doing? Is it a refrigerator, which is in a small, shop, a grocery shop that is in the refugee settlement or the humanitarian setting? Is it something which is a milling process? Is it something which is an egg incubator, which is maybe part of a more long-term program of restarting livelihoods in the settlements itself? So, what is that technology that actually the individuals in the humanitarian setting need to actually improve their productivity, to reduce their drudgery, to reduce their operational costs? What is that technology? That is, of course, the starting point, but it is the very small part of the overall intervention that needs to go out. More importantly, become the next 3 parts of the ecosystem, which is basically looking at technology is being used for something, and I can use it to produce a lot of things, but actually the impact will be dependent on how I sell it, who I sell it to, where do I buy my goods from, and who do I sell it to. So my backward and forward linkages, my linkages to the market is actually what is defining my profit from it, my income from it, my ability to do business from it. And that actually links to the third aspect, which is financing. The first 2 aspects give us an idea of a cash flow. Is it something which is actually viable on its own? Is it something which is financially viable, that is? right? And in that case, how do we look at financing for it? Is it a business model that we can invest in, that an end user can invest in? Or is it a business model that is so needed for the service delivery in the settlement that maybe we want to do it as a service delivery? We want to actually look at capital expenditure completely given as a grant, but we need to keep an eye on how it will continue running, continue to sustain that impact without any further grants going from anywhere. The fourth and the fifth aspect actually can trigger all of the first three parts itself. Policies, whether they are government policies, whether there are organization policies, how they're procuring technologies, how they're providing support in market linkages, how they're setting training programs, all of those aspects can actually spur livelihoods in a particular region. Similarly, training and capacity building of NGOs who are working in the area, of individuals on awareness on these technologies itself, not just the use of it, but training, but actually technical knowledge to actually maintain and service them. Training and capacity building on how to finance it, how to understand the business modeling of livelihoods. All of these aspects, policy and training and capacity building, can actually trigger the first 3 points as well. So in all of these aspects, why we divided them as 5 different aspects is we feel like, they are given by different stakeholders. Technology usually is a different stakeholder from the one who finances, is different from the one who usually gives core training on livelihood or business as well. And we feel understanding who are these stakeholders, the functions that they're performing, and more importantly, what is the value for them to actually give this service or perform this function becomes extremely crucial when we're talking about sustainability of the ecosystem. So to give you an example, when we're talking about who are the stakeholders, the stakeholders that might be present in an emergency situation will be very, very different from a stakeholder which is there in a protracted community. The stakeholders also give us a sense of how complete is the ecosystem. It is possible that not a single
Rashida, we cannot
and
hear
any
you.
of the other stakeholders, the NGOs, the financiers, the local bodies that might be there, can they fulfill that purpose for a while before we actually go into the solution finding as well? But in the end, we need to exit. We need to make sure that the value proposition is established and we're exiting from this ecosystem so that the local stakeholders have found their roles and know how to deliver a certain value itself. If we give a few examples also, I wanted to give an example of a milling solution, which sometimes we've seen as activities which are happening in humanitarian settings itself. But I think 2 ways to actually understand these solutions give an idea of how understanding ecosystem can result in a better solution design. For example, in a protracted community where maybe there is, it's an unrestricted community as well, there is some kind of transaction between the entrepreneurs who are working out of these humanitarian settings, the people who are part of that settlement as well, plus some of the other host community members also. You can think of a market-based approach. Enterprises also, clean energy enterprises, can see these end users as a market. You can have a business model which would run if this person is able to actually give this service efficiently. Mill the flour, mill the chili, create a dough for the families that might be there as well. But in other cases, we need to look at it as an infrastructure cost. In other cases where the market is limited, where the customer for this entrepreneur is also going to be coming in from a poorer background, from an underprivileged background, from a background which doesn't have a lot of money to look at. In that case, how do we look at the enterprises being able to deploy the infrastructure, which is the asset, the capital investment? But how do we look at supporting this entrepreneur, this lady that you see in the picture, to continue to run that business? Support in terms of working capital, support in terms of cash flow management, support in terms of marketing in the community itself, in terms of diversifying their business, understanding the need and growing from there. So this results in 2 kinds of models, 2 kinds of ways that we look at financing. two kinds of ways that we understand the same service being provided from a livelihood perspective in two different types of humanitarian settings as well. Similarly, that's more at a program level. But even at a small project level, actually dividing our work as what all needs to be done from a pre-implementation perspective, actual implementation and post-implementation, again helps us realize what are the different roles that need to be fulfilled. And again, going back to the first question, which is the stakeholder that can fulfill this role over a period of time? If not today, I fulfill this role as an ecosystem builder myself, but over a period of time, whose capacity am I building in locally to be able to do that? As I said, a local entrepreneur, a local NGO, a local training institute, a local financial institution. So in pre-implementation, we understand the business model a lot. We map the technologies, we map the different stakeholders that are available. In implementation, it becomes a lot about procurement, making sure that the on-ground training is happening. But post-implementation, who is helping that entrepreneur grow from there? Or is there an availability of spare parts or supply chain there? Is there someone looking at monitoring the cash flows, helping that person diversify, maintain and service the technology? Those aspects become super critical to plan for when we're designing our program itself. So over here, I think the interesting thing that comes about also is that we understand the role of two players, one which are hyper-local, one which are interacting with the livelihood entrepreneur. Ecosystem players which are technology deployers, which are financing deployers, which are training and capacity building, which are the local holders of the policies as well, to actually work with the end users directly. But the terms and conditions in which these stakeholders engage with the end user is also dictated by the way the funds are coming in. So the funders, the guidelines that are set for them to work on, how do they actually design programs? Do the designing of programs, does that allow them to actually converge different programs to come together? Different partners to converge their plans together and say, I will bring in technology, you bring in financing, someone else is doing the training. Those aspects, that kind of flexibility is also needed to be able to set that milestone for a few years down the line, rather than, and I understand it's different from an emergency setting, but over a period of time, can we actually play that role? So in our experience, the ecosystem approach is used for not just looking at a site level intervention to ensure how that end user is able to access livelihood and energy in a manner which creates impact, but also is able to actually look at it from a little bit of a broader overview and say which stakeholders can actually do this beyond this one site, beyond this one project, and is able to do it in a sustained manner, provide technology, provide training, give birth to new livelihoods and enterprises, incubate them, provide them financing, provide them the right policy or guideline support. So who is able to actually do this over a period of time as well? So with this context, I'm very lucky to also have speakers who actually represent many different parts of this ecosystem itself. We have people who are from the technology background, the ecosystem building background, the financing background, and I will pause here and move on to hearing more from them as well, with a few more examples around how livelihood solutions and energy solutions are being deployed in humanitarian settings itself. Thank you so much, and I'll stop presenting now.
Thank you so much, Rachita. So I'll switch back to my screen. Perfect. So a couple of seconds as my screen is being shown to the audience. Yes, now that it works. And thank you once again, Rachita. And as Rachita mentioned, we have a great panelists who are coming from the different aspects of the ecosystem. So without further ado, I would like to welcome our second presenters, which is going to be a joint presentation between Practical Action and Energy4Impact. And there I would like to invite Nadamina Anaslet, who is the Senior Renewable Energy Expert. And then I would like to invite, sorry, I'm hearing a lot of echo, so maybe I request my panelists to mute themselves for the timing. Thank you so much. And then I would like to invite Herbert Nanga, who is an enterprise development expert with over 18 years of experience in microfinance. So Anastasia and Herbert, if you could switch on your camera, I will pull up the presentation on my screen, and you could switch on your camera and your microphone and begin the presentation.
Thank you very much. This is to present you a concrete example on what Rashida was actually presenting. It's sharing lessons from the Renewable Energy for Refugee project, which was implemented by Practical Action with IKEA Foundation funding in Rwanda. Next. Next slide. Yes, basically this project was implemented from July 2019, and we will be getting to an end in June this year. The project was implemented in 3 refugee camps: the camp of Gihembe, the camp of Kigeme, and the camp of Nyabiheche. Of course, the main partner was the government of Rwanda through the Ministry of Disaster and Refugees. We had also a partnership, implementing a partner as a UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency. We aimed at providing total energy access to refugees and host communities with mainly 3 interventions. One was around providing solar home systems. The other was around empowering refugee and host communities with access to productive use of energy, really creating businesses around the electricity and providing appliances, so that together with the package of access to finance and the technical business trainings as well, so that they can really develop a number of businesses. We'll talk in detail about this. And the last intervention was around refugees accessing physical infrastructure such as street lights in the 3 camps. The productive use of energy, the productive use of electricity intervention, we partnered with Energy4Impact, here represented by Herbert. They're actually our main implementing partner. Again, this intervention was embedded in the 3 interventions on supply, so provision of solar home system and street light. For instance, the provision of street light within the camps allowed the refugees to continue operating their businesses in the dark or during night time. So it was actually well embedded in the general intent of providing total energy access to refugees and host communities. So without saying much, let me give the floor to our implementing partner, Herbert, Energy4Impact, so that he goes in detail in relation to that specific intervention on productive use of energy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Margaret. Thank you very much to the organizers. I'm happy to be part of this webinar. So we were also excited to be part of the RE4R project, and we brought our expertise in the productive use of energy in the local communities. So this is an area that we have been implementing in quite a number of years. And then just like the objective of the overall objective of RE4R project, that was total energy access. For us, we brought almost a 360 support to enterprise development. So we looked at the ecosystem of an enterprise and what that enterprise will require to grow and flourish. And we looked at all those aspects and we tried to bring them together. And we were able to identify around 150 entrepreneurs to participate in this support. Actually, this is a small number compared to the refugees and those communities, but we wanted these ones to be like a peacemaker for the others. And So some of the areas or enterprises that we looked at were examples of hairdressers and salons, butcheries, cyber cafe, phone repairs and tailoring, shoe repairs, food production, egg incubation, and carpentry. So these are just a few examples of the businesses that we are looking at, or we found most viable in that setting. Next slide. Next slide, please. So some of the activities that we looked at so that we can achieve our objective, or which we found very necessary, were we started by looking at the areas that is the refugee camps and the host communities, and try to identify the most viable enterprises, and also other support systems like stakeholders who were giving support to the enterprises. We also set up system for awareness raising. We also did very personalized support in terms of skills development. Including business skills development, technical skills, business mentoring, where we worked through with the entrepreneurs from the around 15 months, trying to mold them to become experienced or skilled businessmen and women. We also established the supply chains for appliances. We know these refugee camps are out of the major towns, and most of the pure appliances are found in the major towns. So we wanted to create a supply chain that will also offer some support later. We also knew that once we support these enterprises, they will increase in their production and the service delivery. So we wanted to expand market through linkages to off-takers and trying to mobilize to promote their products. We also established a business center, and actually this came in between when we started implementing the project, because we noted that most of the enterprises were operating in very informal premises, and which were not safe and not suitable for the businesses. So we thought it is good we provide these enterprises with a more suitable premise where they can be able to do their business. One of the other aspects that we included was a business clinic, PU clinic, and this is the one-stop center where anybody within the villages or else communities who need to know about productive energy could just walk in, get information, and they also could even watch videos of activities being done in other areas where people are doing work using in their enterprises using energy. Next slide, please. So those pictures is an indication of a business center or a business hub, and this was a building that was constructed within the refugee camp, and it provided two things. One, it provided a very suitable environment for conducting business, and also where businesses were connected to energy from the national grid. And two, it also created a business hub where other enterprises were crowded in, that so many services were being opened in the same area, and people were able, even those who are not under leave for other projects, were able to earn their livelihood because of the increased flow of customers within the business app. Next slide, please. So during the implementation of this project and during our interaction with the refugees, entrepreneurs, and the host communities, we had some learnings, and we were able to, because this was the first time to work with the humanitarian in the humanitarian setting, implementing this kind of work. But we came to get some few learnings, or learn some lessons. So one of them was that refugees face challenges in terms of raising finance, which they can use to grow their enterprises. We found that the financial sector, the financial sectors operating within or near the camps, were not willing to lend to refugees, viewing them as a risky category because of their status. And one thing we also noted was that refugees were the most important source of capital for refugees was informal institutions, so informal groups within the camps. That was the main source of capital for most refugees. We also learned that refugees have good initiative and they are willing to improve their livelihood given an opportunity, and they can also improve their business skills and then do successful businesses. We also noted that access to grid power and actual energy was a challenge. One, in the sense that the refugees, by the virtue of their status, cannot be registered by the national grid, by the national regulator as their customers. And two, by the fact that also connection fees are quite high for them, and for them accessing the energy enough to power their appliances is quite expensive. We also noted that refugees would require for the enterprises to be successful, they require quite a number or a package of services that we were trying to offer. And also we noted that entrepreneurs were require some commitment and buy-in when such an intervention is being implemented. It looks like some of them have been frustrated by some other project which programs where the expectation was too high than what they received from a similar intervention. So some of the recommendations we thought could support could improve this kind of work was continue when designing such a project was to ensure that we still have tailored support for mentoring and other support to refugees. We also thought it would be very important to have coordination with the partners and the other institutions and any other program that supports the refugee entrepreneurs. We also recommend creation of trust and the expectation.
But I think we lost him.
Management in case somebody is implementing a similar intervention, so that the project is promised. So we also recommend the support from the financial institutions or supporting financial institutions to come up with the appropriate product that they target this kind of entrepreneurs or people. Next slide, please. Next slide.
Howard, the slide is on, but I
Next
think
slide,
due to internet connection, it seems like it's not streaming, but the slide is on.
Okay, so yes, let me continue with on the last slide. And so what we were able to note some very important impacts from our work, and one of them is that so many refugees were able to visit the PU clinic, which shows that the kind of work which we are doing through the REF4 project created a lot of interest from even those people who are not in the program. For example, 862 refugees visited the PU clinic to learn more about the productive use of energy. So out of the target group, we also noted that refugees were able to increase the entrepreneurs were able to increase their profit by up to 50%, majority of them after the intervention. We also noted an increased business acumen among the refugees, and actually we had some conversion recently from some stakeholders who noted that after the EnDev refugees were moved to Mama, those who came from Mama were more aggressive in terms of identifying the business opportunities in the new location and doing business compared to the ones who were in Mama, who did not receive this kind of support. The other thing was that the refugees were also willing to contribute to the purchase of few appliances. And actually, we were able to distribute or to support refugees acquire 218 appliances. And this was not fully through subsidy. We had a contribution from refugees, meaning that they really were interested to get these appliances. And another contribution we got from some of the institutions that were managing the transition from EnDev to Mahama is that the appliances were the most valuable asset for those entrepreneurs, because during the movement, they ensured that it is well packed, and during the reloading, they ensured that it doesn't get damaged or get lost on the way. That was the most item there that they held so passionately from the movement from EnDev to Mahama. So as I said earlier, the business center, we also found that some new businesses were crowding in those areas, and that created more opportunities for more refugees. So thank you very much for giving this time. Those are some of the experiences and learnings that we got from this project.
Thank you so much to both Harvard and Anaslet for that amazing presentation. And with that, now we are also ready to move to the panel discussion. And for that, I'll pass to you, Rachita. So if you could take over from here. Rachita, you are muted, so we cannot hear anything.
So sorry about that. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing those examples for the context setting. And with that, before we go into the panelists, I don't want to spend time myself introducing them. So I request maybe one by one, starting with Lauren from to actually speak a little bit about the initiatives of EnDev in kind of working with these ecosystem aspects for uptake of energy for livelihood particularly. Lauren, over to you maybe, and then we'll go on to the next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rachita, and the team for the organization of the event, and also for the great presentation we had this morning. So my name is Florent. I'm working for EnDev. I'm based in here in Germany. So EnDev is a program that is working in 21 countries, and the aim of the program is to support companies, renewable energy companies and clean cooking companies, just to summarize. On our side, I think it went, so there's been a kind of, we took conscious that we were not reaching the displaced population or humanitarian, or we were not targeting humanitarian settings, because we were already working with companies. So the reflection we had, I mean, say it's in the past, like 5 years ago, is how can we support companies to invest in displacement setting, to invest time, given our position as a development project. So we are not humanitarian. We do development as GIZ, and also in the other implementers of EnDev. and how we could support companies to invest in displacement settings, to target refugees, the household side, but also the businesses and also the social institutions to become interesting clients for companies that were already present. So I mean, yeah, we mostly use the market-based approach. So we support companies through grants, through result-based finance, so they could reach out to displaced population. And yeah, happy to discuss with the panel on how to do it. We had the I think maybe everyone think is in the center of everything, but I think we are in the center between the companies, their clients, and also the different governments.
Thank you so much, Fern. And I think that kind of program, which is actually seeding a lot of enterprises, allowing then entities to come in and work with them, definitely is an important aspect to look at. And I'll come back with a few questions on that as well. And before that, I would like Paul, if you could please switch on your camera and introduce yourself. Paul is from TENN and works as an ecosystem building entity in Sierra Leone. So your comments, please, on how to look at ecosystem aspects when especially deploying livelihood energy solutions. Paul, we can't hear you.
Sorry about that. Thank you very much, Rachita. It's a pleasure to be to join this discussion. Very important discussion at the point when it is most needed. I am a technical advisor at the Energy Nexus network, TENN in short. TENN is a regional hub for scaling renewable energy solutions and clean cooking solutions. We are part of the Global SDG 7 Hubs initiative and based in Freetown, Sierra Leone. We are quite new, and we don't work in humanitarian settings, as Rachita mentioned, but we are doing quite some significant work and as a startup at the nexus of energy and livelihood, energy and health, and energy and social infrastructure as a whole. Because we are just starting, we have some experiences that can be useful for this discussion. The energy ecosystem itself for humanitarian settings is not different from what you will have in actual situations. So it is just the environment, and there are two things I want to focus on. First of all, you are dealing with a population in flux. So usually when there is a natural disaster and people have moved, it could be floods, it could be landslides, it could be a civil war, as we experienced in Sierra Leone for a good number of years. These populations are usually on the move. But we have also known, and this is the second thing I also want to focus on, is the age of the refugee camps. Is the age of the displaced populations. Some of them, and good examples, for example, Kakuma refugee camp, one of the three main camps that form the Dadaab cluster in Kenya, was established in 1992. 200,000 people, it's still there. Another one is Zatari in Jordan, 2012, 80,000 people, it's still there. So in as much as it's sensitive when we talk about all of this as populations that are in flux, these are populations that can stay, and the systems we work on, the ecosystem elements, most of you just mentioned, and Rachita, thanks for that pace setting keynote opening. It was really good. These things apply.
Sorry, I don't know if it's my Can you hear Paul?
Yes.
Yes, Paul, you're back now. We lost the last two sentences. Maybe we lost them.
Okay, so maybe I try to end that. I was saying that putting this together, putting the population in flux and the age of the settlements, most of what you mentioned, especially in your keynote, and others picked up also in their presentation, Herbert and Anaset, clearly applies to some of these refugee camps that we think are in flux, because they stay and they apply equally as they would for sedentary populations. But I will bring this up in my discussion later. Over to you.
Thank you, Paul. And I think like the way that you articulated it, it also kind of makes sense to say in these kind of settings, you know, even if maybe the inhabitants of the camps might be changing over a period of time, but then the ecosystem stakeholders, the one that who are providing these services and making livelihoods happen, making energy deployment happen, financing happen, you know, how do we really actually work to make sure that those stakeholders come up over a period of time and have models and have solutions that they can deploy? And I think that kind of leads to Abhishek, who is from Equatorial Power, who works as an enterprise primarily and is the voice of the enterprise in this panel discussion as well. Abhishek would be, again, keen to know from your experience of deploying solutions, you know, from a market perspective, you know, as an enterprise again, you know, what are the ecosystem factors that you feel are critical to be looked at, again, when looking at developing livelihood solutions? So over to you, Abhishek, for a quick intro.
Thank you so much, Rachita, and good afternoon to everyone, and thanks for the presentations and a great start to, what would be, I think, a very crucial discussion. Okay, so I'm Abhishek, I'm the co-founder and I lead technology for Equatorial Power. We are a mini-grid developer who started in 2018 with an ambition of providing energy access to difficult areas in Africa, and we hope we can do that. We've faced a lot of challenges, so we go through. I want to just take you through what we do to basically highlight what productive use, how productive use is so important for the core of what we do. So we are a mini-grid developer, like any other mini-grid developer, but we are slightly different from our peers. We focus a lot on productive use of energy, and that poses the core of what we do. As a mini-grid developer, we do set up systems which are expensive, and we are looking at providing power for 24 hours, and we are looking at resilient, sustainable systems. But in the process, we also need to utilize the system. So that's where we look on to communities to give us the demand that we need, and in turn provide enough power for furthering economic development. So apart from electricity, that we do through our grids, we also set up our own agro-processing hubs. So what we do is we do a research of the
We're having some technical issues again, so I'll just wait for a few seconds and check if Abhishek comes back. Otherwise, maybe we'll move ahead with a few questions for our other panelists and then see if we can have Abhishek back. Okay, so let me maybe do that. So Florence, I think it was really interesting, and I'm going to actually combine some questions that are coming in from the chat, even for our audience who's there. We have Herbert and Aslet, who's also going to be joining the panel discussion slightly later. So if you have questions for them as well, please keep sending it to the question box that is there. So Florence, in terms of you working as an ecosystem player as well, and working to deploy these programs and actually engage in terms of where the need lies. And sorry, Abhishek, we lost you for a second. So I'm going to continue with my question with Florence, and then I'm going to come back to you. If that's sure. Please do continue with your presentation again. So Florence, in terms of when you're looking at understanding the need and deploying certain programs, like,
okay.
understanding what kind of stakeholders might be already present in these situations and building those programs with them. It would be great if you could share some learnings on that. How do you look at partnerships? How do you look at partnering with local entities and facilitating this kind of ecosystem building activities over a period of time to take up? Abhishek, sorry, we'll just come back to you after this.
Yeah, thank you very much, Rashita, for the question. So, yeah, the EnDev project is implemented by Arvio and GIZ. These are the co-manager of the project, and then we have the implementers. So GIZ is one of the implementer, Practical Action, SNV, and other NGOs most of the time. So the way we work directly with the Ministry of Energy, is our what we call the political partner, and we try to raise awareness of the political partner on not only the rural access to electricity or to clean cooking, but also to the rural access of displaced population. We also have some pressure, of course, from our donors who recognize that it's important to provide access to energy to displaced population. So out of our 4 main donors are Germany, the Netherlands, Norway, and Switzerland. And then we also have co-funding, so we have extra funding for specific activities or pilots. So yeah, in a nutshell, that's how we work. And then we partner directly with these NGOs, but also directly with companies. So either we partner for a certain set of activities, or we do work through result-based financing. So for instance, the mini grid of Kakuma was built like that. So we had an expression of interest. Okay, who is interested to build mini grid, and then we provide incentives based on the number of connections. Yeah, that's how we work, like very nutshell, and we have a lot of other activities. Maybe one thing is so the beautifulness of EnDev is that it's a very old development program since 2005. Will be here until 2025 and maybe longer. So there's still a lot of work to be done, and yeah, we're happy to establish a partnership with companies, other implementers, and of course the political partners.
Sure. Thanks, Corinne. I have a follow-up question, but I will just pass that aside. And Abhishek, let's try again and wish you the best.
I'm so sorry for that. I hope it stays good now.
Please go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'll just run through. I think we can then get into questions and the panel discussion. So the next slide, please. So we work in geographies such as Uganda, Rwanda, and Congo. So while we don't work essentially in refugee-based settings, in Congo, at least in Congo, half the country is victims of social conflict for decades. And we see that our communities are quite vulnerable, and there is no form of social resilience in the communities. So what we do is we look at the value chain. For example, Congo, along the Congo River, fishing is one of the main livelihoods. So we set up processing hubs, such as here on the left you see a picture where we have ice machines. There are 4 ice machines there, where we set up ice machines to store fish, a fish drying machine to process fish into dried fish so they can be exported, and then we always do couple them with a water purification system. One is to make ice as well as to provide clean drinking water. So we sell. Beyond electricity, we sell ice as a product, or any other agro value chain as a product, then water as a product, and charging services. On the right, you see an electric boat. So we piloted about 15 electric boats, and it seems to be very well welcomed by the community. And this is one of the main productive use applications that we see in many of the geographies we work in. So these productive hubs are set up by us and operated by us. which in turn is increasing the value for our customers. So we don't get into fishing itself. So obviously we get into providing a value for them. We will never get into agro processing hub ourselves, which distorts the market. So we won't do milling. Because we do encourage individual community members to do that themselves. Next slide, please. So the success factors we've seen in this approach are cold storage is quite ubiquitous no matter which country we are in. It depends on what we are storing. So it can move between vegetables in some places to milk, meat, and then fish. Electric boats. So we work on lake islands both in Uganda and Congo, as well as along the Congo River. So electric boats are quite useful there to replace fuel. But everywhere we need to tailor our solutions. That is challenging, but when we do tailor to specific needs, it creates a big impact. We also have IoT sensors in most of our hubs and agro-processing units. With the data, and we are also incorporating machine learning, we can potentially have more efficient systems and provide more a better service for the community in terms of their expectations. Next slide, please. Of course, with success comes a couple of challenges. It is an informal economy. It takes. We are not experts as such. We are experts in providing energy. It took a lot for us to get into to developing value chain based solutions like say ice machines. But we are not experts in that, so we need. We do struggle when we go to a different setting in a different country, and then suddenly the entire ecosystem changes. So we definitely need support on that. Then access to affordable capital. We are getting into vulnerable communities who may not afford the solution. We will continue testing different models, but pilot capital is definitely needed. Till we form a sort of solution which can be replicable in scale, and we find that pretty hard replicating. So we do look at electric boats of something that can be replicable if there is water available and if people are transporting themselves. But there are communities which are inland which it may not be applied to, and again, affordable and efficient appliances itself for the connections that we provide to for the businesses. So we do rely on other institutions to help us provide that. With this, I stop here, and I'm happy to get more questions or and continue with the panel discussion.
Thank you so much, Abhishek, for that. That was really interesting, especially in terms of all the various types of livelihoods that you showcased through your presentation as well. And before we come to you with a few questions, Paul, if I could maybe go to you first. As I think you mentioned in your intro as well, like working as an ecosystem builder in Sierra Leone, it's almost like a glue between different actors that are there whether it's the technology provider, the financier, etc. And I just wanted to kind of hear from you in terms of how do you look at cultivating those partnerships? How do you look at developing programs which is with these multiple agencies coming together? And how can actually funding help you do that better? This kind of convergence, because we often see that even maybe in an energy livelihood discussion, there might be a panel happening on the side which is only about livelihood in humanitarian settings, and here we're discussing energy for livelihood in humanitarian settings. So how do we bring everything together? So how do you see your role in that kind of a setting? Paul, if you could just check your mute. Yeah.
Sorry again. Thank you very much, Wachita. This is a very important question because, I always say when I hear the word ecosystem and use in the energy context, it's always interesting for me because I originally started my career as, hoping to be an ecologist. Yeah. And I know what an ecosystem is. An ecosystem takes time to build, and it's the same with the energy ecosystem. ecosystems, to have all the elements functioning properly takes time. And this is why I initially mentioned that for populations that are in flux, this is a real problem. Yeah, and it's even when you do all the adaptations, even when, you know, like Abhishek is mentioning tailored solutions, yeah, of course these are needed. I must emphasize, it's still a challenge. So how do we go about building that? How do you go about building a system that requires time? It's patience. It's patience, because often you have challenges. We're having terrible challenges here trying to build an ecosystem. You go to events, you go to meetings, people ask you what you do, and you tell them we want to build the energy ecosystem, and they say, what are these elements that form the ecosystem? You start with access to finance for entrepreneurs and end users. You go to market linkages or demand and supply issues. You go to technology itself. You go to policy, regulation, human capacity. For all of these ones mentioned above, it takes time. People want to hear about it. They say, yes, it is fine. You identify partners to work with. First of all, they need training. They need training, and this is where we need SELCO Foundation quite a lot. We need training because all these elements mentioned above, including human capacity itself, need training. Yeah, so you need to train financiers to understand the elements of the ecosystem, to understand that
Sorry, Paul, we lost your audio again. Just the last bit.
Sorry?
Yes, you're back. You're back.
Oh, sorry. So you need training for all of the elements listed above, and not only technology, but this is also where we make the mistake. We think to sustain technology, that is where training is needed. But at TENN, we are now looking at training for all the elements of the ecosystem. Those who are working in the market linkage, forward and backward, the suppliers, those who receive the product, they all need training. Even the policymakers, by the way, they even need more training because they make the regulations, they make the rules. They need training on what the decisions they have to make. So this is very important. But of course, you can have all that training and put all of these actors together and making sure that also they stay together and work in the communities where you operate. And then when you move to other communities, it is not like a cut and paste. You again start. Unfortunately, you need to start again, identify the needs there, and try to address those needs. So this is the experience we bring on board. I deliberately want to bring in another aspect, by the way, which is important, also a livelihood stream in humanitarian settings. It is energy for cooking. Yeah, we haven't done any interventions here yet, but also we are seeing that most of the time when these are held, we talk about electrifications, and thanks goodness now people are even thinking now of productive uses. So it's not just for lighting, energy for lighting, but also energy for productive uses to improve livelihoods. But also cooking is a major part. Think of course, when people deforest, they do it for several reasons, but mostly in humanitarian settings, especially established refugee camps, it's for fuel, it's for charcoal. Yeah, they could use it for timber also for constructing their houses, for the thatches also for construction, or for even livelihood. They enter the forest, get some products to sell for livelihood. So this needs to be brought into context as well. Over to you.
Thank you so much for that, Paul. And Abhishek, kind of linking to what you were saying earlier as well, it was very interesting how you also clubbed different livelihood types together, where you were saying, you know, some livelihoods can be obviously functioning out of the microgrid, but you would take ownership over giving them as service as well, certain activities, certain productive use of energy as well. Whereas others, you don't want to do it yourself. You know, you want to actually have the fishermen take on that part of energy use yourself. I mean themselves. So one aspect was that, even when we work, for example, in SELCO, we usually categorize our interventions as working with completely new enterprises, which we know is a different ball game altogether, the kind of capacity building, hand-holding that is required, versus livelihoods which already exist but can be catalyzed a little bit more if actually energy was given to them. So how do you really go about your assessment, like your need assessment, when you go into these solutions? As you said, the concept remains the same, but deployment is very different from one community to the other. So my question is kind of two parts. One is some learnings around how that assessment itself is done, how those needs itself are identified, and how do you really bucket these kind of energy services? And the second is, do you actually work with other NGOs who are working on core livelihood initiatives in these camps, and how do those partnerships work?
Sure. Thanks, Achita. I mean, I think you will echo what we are going through. I mean, like SELCO does this everywhere. So I think it's pretty much one thing in our mind that wherever we go, we need to find the productive use that, I mean, as a for-profit, we need to find the productive use that works for us, right? And we cannot wait for the system to provide that. We definitely work on encouraging communities to with business incubation activities through either partners or with partners are not available, we do it ourselves. But in order to provide that impact, one is to provide that impact. Second, to have utilization of plants from day one, which means we need a big enough anchor load. And while and this is where I think mini grids have struggled to find that anchor load and then make that cross subsidize the community. So we wanted to be our own anchor load to begin with, but in the process give something to the community that really impacts them without really distorting the market, right? So and the kind of solutions we also look at is capital intensive. And which also comes up with its own challenges of what happens to the maintenance, who runs those machines, maintains those machines. We do hire the local community and train them to operate these machines. But we are, again, since we are providing the service, we are responsible for the operations and maintenance. So that takes the burden away from the community and we realize in communities that they value services and products that can help their economy and livelihood more than kilowatt hours. I don't think they really value electrons as much as we don't value electrons. As long as it charges a laptop, we don't really care about how much. I mean, like me as an engineer probably would, but we never care about how many kilowatt hours are we using and how prudently we use that. But the community really wants to go from one place to the other at the lowest possible cost, most sustainably. So that's the kind of approach we take. We do partner with organizations. We want to partner with organizations who do exist in the geographies we work in. Sometimes it's difficult to get them. For example, in Uganda, we work with nonprofits, as well as we work with partnership with appliance financing companies. Such as Enagro and EnDev Ventures. Uganda is a vibrant market for that, and these companies provide appliances to and business incubation support to our customers. And wherever we have the support, we are going to rely on that because that's the best kind of tailored support that you can get. I've worked with Herbert's team at Energy4Impact for a long time. They have a great team. They have all the experts there in-house. The challenge here, as we see, and that's why we are speaking, is all the panelists here, if we work together, we can, I think, solve many things, right? But we are all working in silos. For example, Herbert will follow a program where the jurisdiction says, like, these camps in Rwanda. Whereas, if Herbert has to work with us, then where does that financing come from? Then we need to lean to a financier and investors who have their own agenda. So this is where we need to. One is, I think we know what we are doing, each of us, and we have our strengths. I think we need to find something that can get us together and work for communities going forward. I think that's what will work.
And a very important point, Abhishek, and that kind of leads me to Florent as well, because sometimes I feel Florent's role also very critical in that sense, because in a way, he's looking at how programs are being designed and how financing is flowing in to many of entities who are working directly in these camps as well. So two questions here, Karan. One is that in like how do you actually from your perspective, when you're actually deploying programs and you're working with partners on the ground, is there actually appetite, in your peers, like especially entities like yours, to look at impact of ecosystem building over a period of time? Like how do you even measure that? Like how do you actually look at having those discussions on what is our impact on ecosystem building for livelihood energy? Of course, we are able to always see impact now today on certain livelihoods and certain entrepreneurs, the number of entrepreneurs trained, the number of solutions deployed, the carbon emissions, people who are taken off the grid or not using generators anymore. But how do we look at impact over a period of time for ecosystem building in a humanitarian setting? That's one question. The other question was linked to what I posed to Paul earlier, which was saying that there is a livelihood conversation happening somewhere. And you as a program designer, do you see a lot of convergence, a lot of partnership happening at fund deployment level as well? I know Abhishek is mentioning that tech providers on the ground need to partner with financing agencies, need to provide, need to actually partner with NGOs who are providing training to actually de-risk some of the technology application usage and financing again. But can we actually also look at programs which are bringing in the experience of financing livelihood programs and financing energy programs together at that level as well? So over to you, Karan.
Yeah, I think the question on partnership. Again, I think we are all in our silos. I think I really like what Paul was saying about the ecosystem. So on our side, we mainly deal with energy, but energy is the basis of civilization for me personally. But then let's talk about that another day. But you need energy for cooking, as Paul mentioned. You need energy for electricity, for powering, for doing things. And I think electricity created great transformation. So for us, we are not really. It's always energy for what, and then the forward can be anything. But our entry point is always energy, because that's what we've been commissioned for. But yeah, and everybody who is working on energy, so energy providers, we are working with them. Now we are about to open a new chapter that cannot really disclose, but mostly to work with energy users. That would be a great chapter for EnDev. And in terms of sectors, I think they were all mentioned there. So it's mostly agriculture, but also all the so agriculture in the big sense. So food system actors. These are the main income generation activities, and we do work with different actors working on livelihood in displacement settings, but also outside of displacement settings. We're working with banks, of course. It's always a bit tricky situation, but I think it's one of the trick for the companies. They can also tell the banks, like, look, we have this strong partner, it's EnDev. They're providing us this money to run our pilot. We are convinced this would work, and then raise more capital with this. So this is very open. If you can re-ask the first question, because I lost it.
Yes. So my first question was on, how from your experience should we be measuring the impact of ecosystem building programs over a period of time? I think especially in emergency settings, we're used to measuring in a short-term period, and that's extremely critical as well. But how do we look at long-term ecosystem building, and how do we really gauge programs on the basis of that?
Okay, I don't have a straight answer on this one. So what the metrics we have is number of people with access to energy, electricity, cooking. We have a few more and more indicators on the enabling environment, so standards, these kinds of things, but they are, now I'm thinking out loud that they are very dedicated to energy. As a program, as EnDev, it's not our role to push the government to give work permits to support the enabling environment. We can only facilitate for companies to enter these areas, but we don't really have metrics to measure the livelihood impacts as of yet. Of course, we're developing new ideas, and one of the ideas that we have is, okay, it's the simple classic metric. How much income how much your income will increase if you get access to renewable energy or to any energy. So we are developing this kind of metrics. Yeah, that's for me the main indicator for livelihood is that, did I increase my incomes after 1 year of using my solar pump? It's just an example, but that would be, we don't use them right now, but we're developing some of these metrics.
That's great to know. Thanks, Corinne, for that. I also wanted to check and wanted to start going into some of the questions that are coming in. So wanted to check if Herbert and Astrid are still there, because there are a few questions that came up post your presentation, which I just wanted to go to quickly now. If you're there, I'd request you to please switch on your cameras, and that would be a signal for me that you are there, and then I can go into those questions particularly. Ranisha, perfect. Thank you so much, Abhishek. So there were two questions that I'm going to combine them actually. One of them was specifically asking a little bit more details around the financing model itself. So were they primarily grant-based models in terms of capital investment, and then was there handholding for these entrepreneurs going forward from there? So if you could just clarify that, that would be great. The other question was that, if there is, you mentioned a bunch of different kind of businesses that were supported to the 150 entrepreneurs, I think, that you mentioned in the presentation. They were, sewing machines, they were refrigerators, they were phone charging points, they were entertainment units. And one of our audience members were just curious in terms of what are the different kinds of impacts that you see in these different livelihoods and the kind of income increase that you see, and does it vary from one livelihood type to the other? So two questions, Anashwat, for you, and please go ahead. Sorry, I think you're on mute. We can't hear you still.
Now it's fine.
Yes.
Thank you very much. I think my colleague Habas will also feel free to jump in. So the financial model we applied is that after assessing the needs and having the first engagement with the refugees, the idea was to facilitate them get connected to electricity and support them into acquiring appliances. In this case, they were funded by 70% in terms of subsidy, and 30% were acquired through own refugees' capabilities. So it's not always easy for refugees to raise the 30%. Talking about partnership, and we took advantage of existing financial service providers' presence around the camps. Talking about microfinance institutions such as Mutanguva that actually provided small loans to refugees in order to raise the 30% equity for their appliances. So talking about partnerships and the ecosystem, so I think leveraging on availing partners and the possibilities is something that has proven to work effectively. Talking about impact, some of the businesses were existing, but not well operational. For instance, because they are not connected to the electricity, they are using rudimental means such as batteries and solar home system that do not have enough capacity. So they're trying to really struggle with whatever they had at hand. But with this, we actually ensured that there was continuous and reliable supply of electricity to their businesses, which in fact, in most of the cases, contributed to an increase of all 50% of income for more than 65% of beneficiaries. So maybe I'll give the floor to Herbert to add on that.
Okay, thank you, Margaret. As you have mentioned, we had this quite notable impact. And what we did first was to analyze the needs of each of the enterprises in terms of skills gap, in terms of energy requirements, in terms of market development requirements. And we classified them as if, in terms of energy, whether they require standalone systems or they require more capacity, meaning that we have to connect them to the national grid. So some of them actually were given enterprise solar home systems, that is large capacity solar home systems to power their appliances, depending on the business they were doing. And the others are those that we clustered in a business center, and these were connected to the national grid. The easiest part was the host community entrepreneurs, and also the refugees who were operating in the host community, because these ones were in areas which were connected to the national grid, and it was easily connected. We found it very important to integrate entrepreneurs from the host community and in the refugee camp, because there were so many synergies in terms and linkages. In terms of maybe creating market in the host community, or an enterprise and bringing the refugee camp, having a market in the host community, or even host community entrepreneurs getting some market from the refugee camp. For example, we had a cooperative that was collecting milk from the host community, and they had the Akura in the host community, but most of the milk was being consumed by the refugees. So the other issue was in terms of the business profitability. Basically, all categories of business were profitable, but we had a few outliers, like those who are doing tradering. We found them mostly they were working in groups, and which they normally call in Rwanda cooperatives. So you could find a group of maybe 30 men and women doing tradering, and initially they were using their own fashion machines, and they could often incur more costs for some designs, where they have to travel out of the camp to get some designs fixed for them. So for this project, it brought a package of 5 different appliances, which provided all the required designs and services to this kind of groups. So out of this, these were able also to attract a larger market. Like we had one cooperative in one of the refugee camp being contracted by one nation to supply uniform to the school, to some schools, and that meant more profit for this kind of enterprise. So we found that those who are doing tailoring in all the camps were able to attract a bigger market, and they also were able to get more profit out of what they were doing as groups.
Thank you so much. And I think just one other thing I wanted to just highlight, which was quite critical from the presentation earlier by Herbert and Maslet, is in addition to the energy interventions as well, I think they played a lot of emphasis on the activities which were behind creating the savings groups, creating the cooperatives, looking at training modules, looking at incubation facilities, business hubs, which in the end Herbert was summarizing as getting the entrepreneurship spirit alive in a lot of the refugees in the settlement, which even a lot of our partners kind of look at it as a base underlying conditions before we can actually work on any of these livelihood energy activities. So they're super critical. Going to Abhishek, I think this question from the audience was actually posted to you, but it was written EnDev, so I'm just going to take the liberty and post it to you, Abhishek, instead. You primarily looked at a model which was looking at deploying livelihood solutions through the mini-grid technology, so to say, or mini-grid delivery model. The question is that how do you really mitigate the risk associated with losses to mini-grid developers in case a refugee camp is closed? Do you have any pointers on or any experience on how that can be, that risk can be mitigated or how that can be managed?
No, that is a great question. So that is one of the biggest risks that we would face when we get into a refugee camp, is because these are not permanent settlements, and most often, to be fair, these communities want to get out of the camp and go into say the closest urban centers, like any refugee would do. So we do get that as a risk, and I don't have a straight answer, except technologically we set up modular solutions that we can pack and leave the next day. There is going to be quite a lot of equipment that is going to be left behind. For example, the distribution network, that's something which is not a movable asset, but at least on the generation side, I can pick up my panels by structure, put it into the container that we use, and we can take it to either the next camp or a different location. And we are actually testing that, and the similar thing with on-grid communities. So we are probably the only developers working with the national utility in villages where the grid is going to arrive, with the hope that we develop the community who are already empowered in using that electricity and already have the cognizance of what energy means before the utility comes, and then utility can then serve profitable customers from the day one, and we would then quit that, take the asset out and move to the next site. So that's the kind of model we would go on with refugees, but that is definitely a risk. There is definitely going to be some amount of infrastructure left behind, and we can do nothing about it.
Sure. Thanks, Abhishek, for that. My next question is actually open to all the panelists and to our speakers, and Aslet and Herbert as well. I think it's a slightly misled question, so you can clarify your positions as well. But the question is, all of the three presenters, none is working directly in refugee operations. Is it because this market has no financial power? Or what are the reasons holding you back to establish partnership with humanitarian operations such as refugees? So I know some of you are working directly with refugees, so you can clarify your point of view as well. But if you have any comments on the sentence, which is basically that the assumption that humanitarian operations or refugees do not have financial power, and so it's harder to get into that market. If there are any comments on that, then please go ahead.
I don't work in settings.
Lauren, please go ahead.
Sorry, Florence.
We have a break taker here. Go ahead, Florence.
I'm sorry, I don't work in humanitarian setting, and well, luckily there is no situation now in Sierra Leone. We experienced a civil war several years back, and we are out of that. Luckily, also our neighboring countries are quite stable, so we really do not have a refugee situation and an urgent humanitarian crisis that is leading to displacement. But of course, sometimes we do have floods, we do have landslides, and populations do get displaced. The issue here is because they are very short-lived settlements, it is difficult to bring in these elements of the ecosystem to operate, to work. So it's not attractive for us for our undertakings. But definitely, I understand in situations where these populations are displaced for quite some time, it's important that these approaches are brought to bear in them.
Florent, would you like to add something?
Yeah, sure. So of course the program is based here in Germany, but is implemented in 21 countries. So we work in humanitarian settings in Mali, Ethiopia, Kenya, Uganda, Mozambique, and also we've worked in Malawi, Tanzania, and Burundi. So no, we do work in displacement settings or humanitarian settings. Also, we responded to the earthquake in Nepal. I think there is sometimes a misunderstanding on the capacity to pay or ability to pay of refugees, and I also thought about your question, which I mean the answer on how do you measure livelihood. The other possibility is to use proxy indicator, which is how much household is spending on non-food item, which is a classic humanitarian indicator to see that people are not spending on food but on other things. So they are kind of getting slightly better. That's the thing. But refugees in displacement settings are not sitting waiting until something is happening. They work. They have other activities. They are employed by the host communities, so they do have certain incomes. Of course, in the majority of cases, and I say the majority of cases, it's lower than the rest of the population. So our idea as EnDev is to make sure that it is attractive for companies to also serve these clients that are thought to be with a lower ability to pay for the same service. But it comes with a lot of challenges, and also I want to thank our donor, because within EnDev we have something called the efficiency of the action. So how many people we can support with our limited funding, sorry. And some of the donors, they say, okay, whenever you support displaced population, this criteria is it's much more flexible than what you're doing usually in non-displacement settings. So there is ability to pay, willingness to pay in displacement settings is not always the same as in other rural areas. And yes, we do work in displacement settings as EnDev.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much to all our panelists for this really engaging discussion. And I hope our audience who joined, found some of the points that were raised here insightful as well. I'd just like to summarize maybe two things. I think partnerships came out extremely strongly across all the presentations and everyone who spoke here. Whether it's in terms of financing, whether it's in terms of business support for the livelihoods that we're trying to inspire or trying to generate in these humanitarian settings. But I think more importantly, also, some of our panelists spoke about what do we consider viability of livelihoods and viability of working in these settlements as well, and that differs from context to context. The ecosystem that is already developed in these humanitarian settings already. We often use this example of saying that, and no one looks at viability of an infrastructure like a road or an airport, but we know that an airport actually brings in economy in a region. It spurs business, and there are incentives like that which can be created, which make business possible, which make livelihood and enterprise coming up of that possible. We heard some examples here, and I think that would be one of my key takeaways to take back. Where how do we really develop this ecosystem which make it possible for livelihoods to be viable? And that means we need more stakeholders, more partnerships, and viability to be looked at a long-term level. So really, thank you so much to all our panelists. Thank you so much for the lovely questions that came in from the audience as well. And over to you, Ranisha, for the last words.
Thank you so much, Rachita, and also to the amazing panels. So we had a great panel, and that also brings us into the webinar series. We hope our audience really enjoyed it. As usual, you can send us your feedbacks. You can access the webinar recording and documentation from today at this link, which will also be shared via email. So until the next webinar, we thank you again. Thank you again to all the panelists, and we hope you have a good day. And thank you, and bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Bye.